Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of Zebra Talks, part of the Taylor Vinters Zebra Project on the future world of work. And we've had loads of interesting discussions with panelists and external contributors as part of the Zebra Project. But I thought it'd be a great idea to get some of our employment team onto the videos to talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing, particularly in response to the Taylor Review consultations. There have been 4 consultations in all. I've already had a chat with Rachel Ashwood about the agency workers consultation. And so I'm here with Scott Glacken, who's Senior Associate in our team here. And Scott, you have been leading our response on the consultation relating to employment status, is that right?
That's right, yep.
And what broadly does that consultation look at?
So employment status is really the very foundation of our employment law in the UK, and it's also of fundamental importance in working out who should pay what tax. And this was one of the key points looked at in Matthew Taylor's review of modern working practices. And this consultation really looks to build on that work and look at some of the issues in a bit more detail.
Okay. And can you pick out sort of 1 or 2 sort of key recommendations that the government was seeking views on for the basis for the benefit of innovative employers, I should say?
Sure. One in particular was around how we should put the employment status test into law. At the moment, the rules are spread across various pieces of legislation, a mountain of case law, and it's really difficult for employers and employees or workers to know what the rules are, which means it's difficult for them to try to implement more innovative ways of working.
So if you don't know the rules of the game, how can you comply with them? How can you set up your businesses in the right way?
Exactly.
And we probably should say as well that the definition of an employee is different depending upon what kind of law you're talking about. So an employee for discrimination purposes is different to an employee for unfair dismissal purposes.
Exactly. And then for tax purposes, it's different again.
So a whole mess of confusion. Okay, so that's one recommendation. Have you got another you could focus on?
Yes, the other one that struck me was the definition of worker.
Okay.
So that's this intermediate category, somewhere between a full employee and a self-employed individual. And workers have a limited set of employment rights around holiday pay and national minimum wage, this sort of thing. So at the moment, the rules are pretty grey. Again, employers, individuals are not so sure on what the rules are.
Yeah.
And the consultation looks in a bit of detail in how that could be better phrased in the law.
Sure, and then presumably the only way for employers and employees stroke workers to find out what the status is to have a fight about it, which clearly isn't beneficial for anyone.
Exactly. It's really difficult at the moment, and the law's just not really very accessible.
Okay, so those are a couple of the key proposals. What have we, Taylor Vinters as a firm, had to say about some of those issues?
So in terms of the legislation piece, how do we put employment status rules into law? We think that there certainly needs to be some legislation which sets out, the minimum criteria for someone to be an employee.
Yeah.
So, there are 3 key pieces: control, personal service, and mutuality of obligation. This obligation to give work and for the employee to accept the offer of work.
Yeah.
So we think, let's get those set out really clearly in legislation.
Makes sense.
But there's also a whole bunch of other factors that go towards deciding whether or not someone's an employee. It's not practical to set those all out in a piece of legislation, so we think let's have a code of practice written in plain English. It can be updated as the law evolves, but it can be a single source for employers and individuals to refer to, and it should give them the opportunity to just be able to understand what the rules are, and then they can plan their business accordingly.
Okay, and then presumably if they still can't agree and a court or a tribunal has to judge whether someone's a worker or an employee or a contractor, then that's something that court or tribunal will have to take into account in doing its assessment.
Absolutely, yes. So, I mean, this code of practice is not going to have the same binding status as a piece of law. But if we require tribunals to at least take account of that in making their decisions, it just adds to the certainty people have when they're setting up their businesses.
Okay, and the second thing you mentioned was this whole definition of work, very grey at the moment, as we know. So, what have we had to say about that?
Well, one of the key issues with the definition at the moment is it catches individuals at all across the kind of spectrum of workers. So at one end we've got the more vulnerable, low-paid maybe workers, delivery riders, taxi drivers, this sort of thing, and maybe at the other end, highly skilled consultants who just choose to have this sort of portfolio career. Well, they'll do sort of temporary engagements here and there. Arguably, they're all caught as workers at the moment. So businesses have to grapple with the issues of holiday pay, national minimum wage, etc. And our proposal really is that it's absolutely right to give those additional protections to those more vulnerable workers.
Yeah.
But for those individuals at the other end of the spectrum who have proactively taken the decision to arrange their career in this way because they can afford to, I think that the law at the moment maybe hampers the flexibility that parties have. So more of a focus in the definition on dependence, and I think the extent to which the individual is dependent on the business for their work, or how that dynamic of bargaining power works. I think that's something that needs to be factored into the law, which will just give parties the right balance between flexibility on one hand and protections where they're needed.
Sure, so effectively, very vulnerable people, if you don't have equality of bargaining power either in setting up the terms of the arrangement or in fact whether you can sort of accept or reject work, because sometimes, so for example, Uber drivers, one of the big points is that if they reject work too many times, they get locked out of the system. So that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay, but then obviously maintaining a flexible economy so that otherwise people can contract on whatever basis they want.
Quite.
Okay, makes sense. So, well, that's very interesting. This is probably one of the main planks of the Taylor Review. So it'd be really interesting to see how the government implements all of this. Thanks for your time, Scott.
Thanks very much.